Well, thank you. I'm so thrilled to be in this room with this group of people who know something about climate change and are actually engaged in it and interested. For the past 4 months, I've spoken to lots of groups of all different types of groups, most of whom have had nothing to do with climate change. And coming to my event, for many of them, was the first time they ever went to an event that was specifically about climate change, which is, you know, a real honor and a privilege to have that. I just completed a cross-country tour by train from Harrisburg to Vancouver, British Columbia, making stops in multiple places, speaking at universities and at churches and synagogues, all sorts of places, talking about climate change and doing climate comedy. That stuff's funny. And when I was in Minneapolis, I was asked by a minister if I would come to their church for Sunday morning and preach a sermon. And because in my background, I do some religious stuff. And he said, I would love it if you gave a sermon about climate change. I think my people really need to hear that. And I thought, well, maybe, but, you know, they're probably not prepared for that as they walk in the door. And I was, you know, planning for weeks in advance, and I thought, what should I say and what should I not say? And I came up with a list of 3 things I probably should not talk about when given the opportunity to do a sermon about climate change. And the first thing I decided I probably shouldn't talk about are the polar bears. I mean, I think they are overexposed at the moment. You know, they are the privileged mammal of the environmental movement. And I think just people, they're so distant and cold and fierce, and it doesn't actually motivate the average person, according to lots of research done about that. So I won't mention polar bears. And I thought, okay, I probably also shouldn't mention terrifying dystopian future scenarios. Because although that jazzes up lots of climate people, it's sort of like, yeah, we need to save the world, and oh my God, the average person actually completely shuts down when they are terrified. The brain, like literally neural pathways shut down when we experience fear or shame. People can't think and process information. So although it jazzes us up, it's not really the best strategy in communicating with people about climate change. And I thought, okay, well, there's probably one other thing. If I'm talking to a group of people, doing a sermon about climate change, I probably should not mention climate change. I just should avoid it, because it's a problem. Because people, it's not even that people don't want to hear about climate change, it's that, according to lots of research, people literally can't hear anything about climate change. It's just sort of like bounces off their brain. And I'll give you a good example. When I got to that church in Minneapolis, I walked in the door and there was this woman there I'd never seen before, but apparently she'd been following me for years with the comedy that I do around a bunch of different issues. And she was like, oh my gosh, I heard you were coming to our church and I'm so thrilled. What are you preaching about today? I said, yeah, I'm preaching about climate change. And her reaction was like this. Blank. She just went blank. There was nothing there. It wasn't like she was hostile or confused, just blank. And then all of a sudden she was like, oh, there's coffee over there. Jeanette, cockroach. Oh my gosh. And she was gone. She just kind of blanked out and got distracted. I call this climate-induced distracted zombie syndrome. You may have experienced this maybe at a dinner party or when somebody asks what you do and you start talking about climate change and they just blank out, and then they come up with something else to talk about. And so talking about climate change can be complicated with people who are not really engaged. Now, I'm not talking about like the hostile people, but literally people who think, oh yeah, there's an issue, but just can't get close to it. Now, before I go any further, I do have to make a confession, in that I am not an environmentalist. Okay, not that I have anything against environmentalists. I mean, some of my best friends are environmentalists. But when I say that, I mean, I care about the planet and all, but it's not my jam. I mean, it's not what I've been doing for years. My work is as a comic for the past 10 years, as a Bible scholar, and as an activist around lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender issues. That's my realm. That's what I've known for so long. And about a year ago, I took a year off to just study climate science and how to communicate climate change, because it became so important to me. I thought, this needs to be my new work, and apply the same sort of strategies I did with all this LGBT work and faith work and see what I can do around climate. So I'm not an environmentalist, and I have to say, as someone who's done gay activism for the past few years, we're such in a weird time in history. I mean, like right now, 70% of Americans live in states where it is now legal for 2 men to marry each other or 2 women to marry each other. And I mean, that's kind of astounding when I think about 10 years ago where things were at when I first started work around these issues. But it's also really annoying. Right? I find it really annoying because suddenly I have the right to marry the man I love right at the beginning of the end of the world. That's annoying. And I just want you to know, do not blame the gays for climate change. We often are blamed for weather catastrophes. I'm not quite sure why we are, but no, it was the flamboyant, immoral, fossil fuel lifestyle that got us into this. Don't be blamed. So I've been trying to think of creative responses to climate change. My husband, Glenn, who teaches at this institution, he and I started a chapter of the Citizens Climate Lobby over in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, nearby. And we've been looking at various creative responses. How can we use art and communication to engage more people? And so I thought, after doing all my research, I've developed a couple of different talks. So I now do a talk called Climate Change, What's Faith Got to Do with It? So what's faith got to do with it? Another talk I do now is a queer response to climate change. What would Walt Whitman do? So it's sort of looking at climate change from an LGBT lens and asking, like, do LGBT people actually bring something specific and different to this discussion? And finally, I have a play I do, a one-person show called Does This Apocalypse Make Me Look Fat? It's a comedy about broken bodies, large and small. And I'm also the host of a weekly program called Climate Stew, which you can listen to online through Stitcher or iTunes or at climatestew.com. And to explain what Climate Stew is about, here's just the opening of how every episode starts. This is Climate Stew, the show that takes a serious look at global warming but doesn't try to scare the snot out of you. Explore your role on a new planet with your host, Peterson Toscano. And then it goes on for about 12 more minutes where I play multiple characters. And I wanted to apologize for having 30 minutes all to myself when everybody else were like jammed into these little slots. But since I'm a character actor and will be playing at least 3 different characters while I'm here, I feel like I'm distributing the space a little bit more. So I want to just do the rest of my time basically giving you some samples from my work. Excerpts from my play and definitely excerpts from Climate Stew to show you how I'm experimenting, and it is still an experimental stage, using comedy and storytelling and characters to talk about climate. And one of the things I've been learning a lot in the research is that we can form the most beautifully formed message, but people typically are not listening to messages. They're listening to messengers. And they listen to people with whom they relate. And if they don't connect with you, if they don't identify with you, often they want nothing to do with what you have to say. So I want to do a scene from Does This Apocalypse Make Me Look Fat? It's a scene with one of my favorite characters, Marvin Bloom. And Marvin has come up in other plays that I've done. In fact, online there's a lot of stuff of Marvin, even videos, and there are many people in the world who really truly believe Marvin is a real person that I have nothing to do with. And he comes up a lot in my work. And in this monologue, Marvin and his partner Tristan are concerned about climate, so they decided to start a group in their community. And this is the inaugural first meeting of their group, and Marvin Bloom just sort of starts it off. So you ready for a scene from Does This Apocalypse Make Me Look Fat? Hi everyone, and welcome to this very first inaugural meeting of the Citizens Climate Brigade. I'm very excited I'm very proud of you for coming to today's meeting. My name is Marvin Bloom. You probably know my partner Tristan. He's the one who set everything all up. Well, he was called off to work last minute, so I got stuck with the meeting. I had the privilege of being with you today. And Tristan gave me some notes of what we should talk about. And the first thing Tristan wanted me to tell you is that there is still hope, okay? There were things that could be done, that's what we're here to talk about, ways that we could move forward. I mean, we're not dead in the water yet, okay? We haven't gone to hell in a handbasket. Okay, we know the shit's gonna hit the fan, all right? But we don't yet know how much shit and how big of a fan we're gonna need to deal with it, all right? So there's still hope, and we'll talk about things that we can do down the line. Next thing, Tristan said many of you have been emailing him about friends and family and coworkers who are deniers, climate skeptics, and you're trying to figure out, well, what could you say to that? What could you say? You know, and Tristan has his own ideas about it, but I've been thinking about it, and it's weird, right? You have all this science, consensus, people agreeing, and still people are confused. It's like saying, you know, cigarettes don't cause cancer, and then you reach for another one. It just doesn't make sense. But then I was thinking about it more like psychologically, what's going on there? And immediately I thought of it. Kubler-Ross. You know, Kubler-Ross, the people who brought the stages of grief. I don't know if it's one person or 5 people, whatever. Kubler-Ross has this thing that when something terrible happens in your life, you know, a loved one who's diagnosed with something awful, or, you know, you're not going to graduate on time, you find out, or, I don't know, Lady Gaga comes out normal. And you go crazy, you know, you don't know what to do. And you go through these different stages until you get to a place of acceptance. And what is the first stage of Kubler-Ross? Anyone know? Stage of grief? Denial. Very good. Denial is the first. It's like, no, this can't. Ma can't be sick. Ma's never been sick a day in her life. She's too big to fail. And you know, you fight, you deny, you push it away, like, no, it can't be. And I think many of these people who are struggling with climate change is that in their gut, in their heart of hearts, they know if this is real, it changes everything. And so they fight. They have all this energy, no, we can't accept it. And this gives me hope, actually, because there's something to me honest about a climate denier, emotionally honest, even if they got the facts a little screwy. No, because I think once they get through the denial stage, right, and they go through the anger stage, and then the bargaining, and the sadness, it's going to get very messy, okay, folks? But once they go through all this stage, they come to the place of acceptance. They accept the reality that we're in, and suddenly they can use all that energy and harness it to actually do something useful. So I'm really thrilled about that, you know, that the possibility. Now, there is a type of denial that I have no patience for, okay? That is the hope denier, okay? This is the person's like says, no, no, we've gone too far, there's nothing we can do, and that's exactly what they do, nothing. Now, I have to admit it, I have a soft spot in my heart for climate deniers, because if I'm honest with you, and why can't we be honest, right? If I'm honest with you, I can tell you that I myself am a denier. Not a climate denier, no, I'm alarmed about global warming. I wish there was a hoax. But if I'm honest with you, I can tell you that I am a cholesterol denier. No, I don't actually believe there is such a thing as cholesterol. It has been totally manufactured by the grant-hungry American Heart Association and those Quaker Oats people. No, think about it. Our bodies actually produce cholesterol. We need it to live. Now, Tristan tells me I'm wrong about the science, whatever, but you know, he's got his own healthy heart style that he's trying to shove down my throat. But that's a different story. So next I want to do a sample from the Climate Stew show. The show has 3 segments to it. The opening segment is a single news story. And I often do it again in character, I do it in my own voice, and I'll take actual news about climate change, mitigation, adaptation, all this stuff, but I make it in a way that the average layperson could understand and add lots of metaphors. Then there's the main section, and even our own Dr. Kathy Straub was in one of my main sections. I interviewed her. She did a really great interview where we sort of like dismantle all of these myths about recycling and stuff. And it was, I think, very accessible, and people really liked it. I like taking science and scientists and weaving their work into my own. And so I wanted to do this comic monologue of a character that I love performing. Her name is Elizabeth Jeremiah. Now, a little bit of a disclaimer here about this character, because a character like Elizabeth Jeremiah, I find that sometimes it's hard for people to hear her. For one, she's female. And it's rumored that in certain circles, even academia, that women aren't heard as much as men. I don't know if this has been confirmed or studied, but apparently that is a thing. And also she's Southern. And this is another problem at times because particularly folks in the North, as soon as they hear a Southern accent, something flips in the brain and they assume the person doesn't know what they're talking about, which is problematic because they often do know what they're talking about. Finally, she's religious, and there's often lots of biases against that. I know that as a religious person myself who's lived in the South too. So I just want you to turn off those filters and just listen closely to Elizabeth Jeremiah. She's actually very wise and very informed. So imagine, you're driving in your car, you're returning, I don't know, home from some conference, climate conference, feeling guilty about all of the gas you're spending and trying to figure out ways to offset it or justify it or whatever. And you're falling asleep and say, let me just turn on the radio. And you do, and suddenly, this is what you hear. This is Elizabeth Jeremiah from the Elizabeth Jeremiah Global Worldwide Ministries in Jesus. I requested to appear on this radio transmission to share a concern I have for you, one that potentially affects generations to come. What I'm talking about, of course, are generational curses. In my church, we warn people that their actions today have consequences for our children and our children's children's children. Oh, and I hear you saying, but Elizabeth Jeremiah, I don't have any children. To which I reply, then I will pray for you. Our actions, for good or bad, have repercussions like ripples on the ocean that reach far beyond us. Exodus chapter 36, verse 7 states that the iniquities of the fathers will fall upon the sons, and upon the sons' sons, unto the third and to the fourth generation. And this applies to mothers and daughters too. God is not a respecter of persons. Now, I discern that many of you in the listening audience are secular humanists. So I will give you an example of a generational curse that might make sense for you. Carbon dioxide. Thank the Lord that He created this wonderful chemical compound that is filled with the energy and with the wonder-working power of the sun. No, not the Son of God, but the sun in the sky that God created. The carbon dioxide, which we breathe out, by the way, is held up high in the heavenly firmament, which you call the atmosphere, and moves about and warms the planet, otherwise known as our earthly home, which would be just a dead, frozen rock, like the hearts of some people I have known. 150 years ago, our ancestors, bless their hearts, hoping to better themselves, began to burn coal in factories. Now, a 1-foot pile of coal condenses the energy of 10 feet of decomposed trees and plants. So a lot of bang for the buck. Our people burned the coal and then the petroleum, which is even more energized. God had created the perfect system that recycles. I know y'all like that word, recycle. A system that recycles carbon dioxide through trees and the oceans, giving us clean air. But the system got overburdened and just couldn't keep up. And this is not God's fault. I hate it when people ask, if God is so good, why is there still evil in the world? Well, it is because people are evil, selfish, wasteful, vengeful creatures. We've behaved like those awful tenants in the vineyard that Jesus preached about, who were given land to care for, but instead squandered God's riches like a whore-hungry, drug-addled prodigal son or husband. Our ancestors, Father, forgive them, for they knew not what they did not know that a single molecule of carbon dioxide, which is smaller than an angel on a pinhead, remains in the heavenly firmament, stockpiled one on top of each other for 100 years, ultimately disrupting the seasons and bringing disasters and woe upon all our heads, especially for those poor people in Africa. But here is the good news. We have the power to break a generational curse and turn it into a blessing. How? Repentance. Just repent of your evil, polluting ways. Oh, and I am not talking about sitting around and self-indulgently calculating your personal carbon footprints and feeling all good about yourself. No. We need national repentance. We need to turn from our sinful fossil fuel lifestyle and go in a whole new direction. Instead of a curse, we shall give unto our offspring a blessing of clean air and a stable planet. The Lord God Almighty gives us His firm promise in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and forgive their sin and will heal their land. Now that's God's good stuff. This has been Elizabeth Jeremiah from the Elizabeth Jeremiah Global Worldwide Ministries in Jesus. May God richly bless you and keep you and your whole household too. In a later episode, Elizabeth Jeremiah discovers the existence of ecofeminists. And although she is immediately opposed to it, the more she knows about ecofeminists, the more she can relate to this whole idea of people treating the earth like men have treated women. And it becomes a very interesting monologue about sexism as well as about how we treat the planet. The last segment of Climate Stew is a segment that actually comes from the future. It's called That Day in Climate History. It's a report from the future that looks at the past about how we might deal with climate change in our present. It comes to us from the year 2165, 150 years in the future. And again, using science about, projections, but particularly different things that people are doing or groups of people can do, I weave together the monologue. So it might be what a group of clergy in Albuquerque do to address heat waves and create a sanctuary project so people have cool places to stay in the hottest times of the year. Various projects that different groups might do. And I wanted to do That Day in Climate History that was a little bit more broad and general about sort of an overview of the resiliency that I think is required in this crisis that we're in. And just so you know, at the end of every episode of That Day in Climate History, there's a commercial. So you get to hear what will be advertised 150 years from now. All right, so now's our segment of That Day in Climate History. I am Timothy Meadows. It is Wednesday, January 9th, 2165, and time for That Day in Climate History. Every generation has shared moments that defined and shaped them. During the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, an extraordinary generation faced regional drought, global financial collapse, and devastating world war. During the 1980s, a plague first known as GRID, the gay-related immune deficiency, with a 100% fatality rate, affected many types of people in the United States and much of Southern Africa, and then worldwide. Though the US government at first refused to respond to the HIV/AIDS crisis, our ancestors acted up and forced their leaders to act. Starting in about 2015, our ancestors at last recognized they faced another threat, climate change. The rapid warming of our Earth home had unleashed a fury of weather catastrophes. The handwriting was on the wall, and humanity, along with most of the species, seemed doomed. As a result, the climate generation acted with determination and skill to save civilization and all we hold dear. Because of their hard work and the hardships they face today, although we still are responding to the effects of climate change, we enjoy stability, peace, justice, clean air, and so much hope. If we could reach back in time, we would say, thank you. On this day in 2165, we remember that day in climate history.
Climate History is brought to you by Taco Bell, introducing the new Santa Saltamonte sandwich made with 100% organic free-range grasshoppers.
So I have a team of people I work with, the Climate Stew team. There are environmental science teachers, there are researchers, there are artists, and we talk about different ways we can communicate. And the show goes out once a week, but it's available all times. And people are starting to use it in classrooms where they'll play an episode or have their students listen to 1 or 2 episodes and talk about the intersections that they're seeing about how climate change isn't just about science. It isn't just about policy, but about every issue that is interesting to us, women's issues, LGBT issues, disease, all kinds of things. And the hope is to use the comedy and get people to listen who normally won't. Now, you'll have a lot of people who just see the title Climate Stew and they won't go anywhere near the show. So what I do then is I also take out excerpts and repackage it and put it on SoundCloud. SoundCloud is like the YouTube of audio. And I will put it out there and not have a word about how it's about climate change, but about, you know, the other things that it is about. And I find that by just repackaging it, they'll hear the climate change, people listen, and they will then forward it to their friends and share it with each other, and getting people to engage on that whole other level. I've got some flyers up there for Climate Stew and also my information. There's also a sign-up sheet. Although I do this work nationally and throughout Europe, I happen to be based in central Pennsylvania, very close to here. So if you ever want me to come to your school and do a presentation, I would like that very much. So thank you so much. I think it's time to move on, or we have time for maybe a question, if there's a question or two, or comment. Yes?
So what has been the segment that you have done that's been most friended or most liked or most popular?
On the SoundCloud, that's running between Elizabeth Jeremiah and meeting the ecofeminist. And I just say, it's titled An Evangelical Woman Meets Discovers Ecofeminism. And that's just kind of blown up just because of that title. The other one is very recent, actually. I just put out. Marvin Bloom talks about the many ways that LGBT people have faced potential extinctions and exterminations through Nazi Germany, through the HIV/AIDS crisis, the epidemic today of violence against trans women of color, and the strategies that we have developed to deal with that, and then how that can be related to the climate crisis. And one of the points that it made is in the AIDS crisis, everybody suffered, but not equally. Because depending on your race and your class and your access to health care, you suffer differently during the early AIDS crisis. So yes, we were all in the same boat together, but we were not all on the same deck. There were some people really suffering in the steerage class. And that's very much what we're looking at with climate change. It's sure, we're all in the same boat, but we're definitely on different levels. And so it brings it, and that's been a very popular segment for sure. Any other questions or comments? Yes?
Have you done any sort of formal evaluations of impacts of your program?
Nothing extremely formal. When I was in a couple of schools I went to, they had a lot of the students write reflection papers. And I was looking to see two things. One, did they get the main points of what I'm going for? And two, was there a lot of pushback or resistance? Because that to me would have been a signal that and particularly one of them was in Iowa. So here I'm this, gay speaker talking about climate in a faith perspective. There'd be lots of reasons to push back. There's lots of areas. And I was so pleased to see that people, like literally across the board, every student really understood the basics of what I was talking about. They were genuinely enthusiastic and said, oh, I heard things I didn't expect, which I think is really important with climate work, because people always assume they know what you're going to say. And lastly, there was no pushback. There was nobody, sort of saying, yeah, but he kind of pushed it too far on that point. And I think a lot of it has to do with humor and keeping it based in stories. Because I'm not just talking about facts and figures, but I'm going to the bigger picture, and I think that helps. Yeah.
Did the woman at the end of your sermon come back and seek you out or talk to you? Or?
She did, because what I did was a scene from, I didn't talk about climate change directly, I did a scene from my play about the siege of Leningrad in World War II, which has got some pretty horrendous history about suffering, but also how people retain the ability to remain human in the midst of a horrible catastrophe. And I use that as a metaphor that there are certain generations that they have to face something extreme, some more so than others. And even just transitioning from dirty to clean energy will mean certain hardships for people, and learning new tricks and learning new ways to live. And she was so thrilled about it. She was very engaged in it. Because I presented more a metaphor about climate change than just talking about it directly. Because I felt that would have been much more effective, particularly because they were so unprepared. It seemed unfair to just throw it on them first thing in the morning. Last question.
I love it that you're talking about sustainability and diversity at the same time. And very recently at my institution, Bucknell, we're trying to come up with a definition of sustainability. And when the draft went out, it said sustainability includes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and diversity. diversity, I was thinking that many of us may have an idea of how diversity and sustainability are related, but probably the general public does not. And I would love to hear how you think of the relationship between diversity and sustainability.
Okay, a big, huge monster question. We don't have time, sadly, for me to answer that because I think we need to move on. But it is something that really is so interesting to me, and I think there's a real important key to this. And I think having as many different voices that come to the table will, if nothing else, will help with the justice issues at the heart of much of the climate action that needs to be done. Because if we can come up with all sorts of amazing plans that could technically, make sure that people are fed or make sure that there's less this or that, but if justice isn't at the heart of it, it may just increase more oppression. And as Marvin says at the end of his other monologue about extinctions, he says something like, why should we just save the world if we're going to complete the same, continue on with the same oppression that we've been doing for hundreds of years? So this is a chance that not only do we address this crisis, but we also do it in a way that's thoughtful and that's sustainable to justice and to really encourage justice movements without hampering the movement that we have to make with climate mitigation and adaptation. Thank you so much for the chance to be a part of this.